Getting out my glasses.
I have mine here. I will present you.
Oh, sure, of course. I'm going to give us some water.
Thank you.
You're welcome. No. No.
Anybody back there? Hey, all right, we have sound. Muito bem-vindos. O meu nome é Michael Baum, faço parte aqui do Conselho Executivo da FLAD. On behalf of FLAD and the Luso-American Development Foundation, I'd like to thank everyone for coming today. Very special guest that we have here. I don't know if you know it, but this is the 17th session that we've done of Meet the Author, and it's the second session this year in 2026, and we feel very privileged to have with us today Siri Hustvedt. She's going to talk about her work with the journalist and writer Isabel Lucas, who has been with us for all of these years, collaborating with FLAD and conducting all of these conversations with the invited writers. I also want to give a shout out to Real, the person who sort of puts this together here at FLAD, Rui Valera, as part of the arts and culture team here at FLAD, and of course all the staff that helped to make this possible for the 17th time. I also want to take this opportunity to thank Don Quixote and Leia for their cooperation and support for this session. Siri Hustvedt has several books published in Portugal over the past 31 years. Don Quixote has been the publisher of several of her books, and Fantasmas is Siri Hustvedt's most recent book, published just in May of this year. Basically, I'm going to keep this short and sweet. Hope you enjoy this session. We always leave some time at the end for Q&A, so you can ask questions of the author, and I hope you have a great session, and thank you very much for being here, Siri.
Thank you.
Boa tarde, good afternoon. A woman loses her husband. That sentence sounds simple enough. Literature is full of it.
It is.
But Ghost Stories begins where that sentence ends. What disappears when someone dies? A person, of course, a voice, a face, a body, but also a conversation, a shared history, a private language, a way of moving through the world, and perhaps something even stranger, a version of ourselves. This is the territory of Siri Hustvedt's new book. Readers of her work will recognize many of the questions that have occupied her for decades: memory, identity, consciousness, the body, the relationship between experience and narrative, the stories that we tell ourselves in order to understand who we are. What makes Siri Hustvedt unusual is that she has never accepted the borders that separate disciplines. Her work moves between fiction and essay, literature and neuroscience, philosophy and psychoanalysis, always returning to the mystery of what it means to be a human being. Now I remember human being. A human being. Sorry. Among other human beings. Ghost Stories was written after the death of Paul Auster in April 24. It is tempting to call it a memoir. It is tempting to call it a book about grief. Neither this description feels sufficient. This is a book about absence, certainly, but it's also a book about presence, about the dead who continue to accompany the living, about memory as a form of haunting, about the strange elasticity of time after loss, about language and its limits, about what survives. Its pages move between diaries, letters, photographs, philosophy, family history, literary criticism, and personal recollection. They contain Paul Auster, but they are not confined to him. Again and again, the book opens onto larger questions. What happens to the word we when one half of it disappears? How do we continue a conversation with someone who is no longer here? Can a life ever be narrated completely? And what remains outside language? At one point, Siri Hustvedt quotes Emily Dickinson, "The abyss has no biographer." It is a line that could stand over the entire book, because Ghost Stories does not try to conquer mystery, it inhabits it. The ghosts of this title are not supernatural creatures. They are the ghosts of love, the ghosts of memory, the ghosts of language, the ghosts of time, and perhaps the ghosts of New York itself, a city that both Siri and Paul spent decades observing, imagining, and transforming into literature. It is a great pleasure and honor to welcome you here in Lisbon, and
Thank you so much, and thank you for that really eloquent and beautiful, summary of the book. Thank you.
thank you. Now we invite you to read a passage of your book before our conversation.
I think I'm just going to read just the beginning because there's nothing to explain then. And this first chapter is called Lost Time. I am alive. My husband, Paul Auster, is dead. He died on April 30th, 2024 at 6:58 p.m. here in the Brooklyn house where I am now writing these words. He was diagnosed with non-small cell lung cancer in January 2023. But before that, in early November 2022, Paul had a CT scan in the emergency room at Mount Sinai West Hospital. The radiologist spotted a mass in his right lung and noted it might be cancer. We all die, but only some of us know our lives could end soon. Although I had often thought about what it would mean to live without Paul, I began to imagine it more often. I imagined walking around the house alone. I imagined grieving. If your father dies, I said to our daughter Sophie, I will lose my everyday. What I didn't imagine is that after Paul's death, time would be deranged beyond recognition. I remember and then forget what day it is. I remember it's the month of May and then forget. The hours skip ahead, but minutes often move slowly. I want to root my body in calendar and clock, those reliable, if ultimately fictional, markers of time. But I'm not making sense of their regular beats. I'm afraid if I don't keep checking date, day, and hour, I will lose my orientation, stumble on the stairs, and fall or float away ungrounded. I make lists and calendars. Lists and calendars lie on various tables and surfaces around the house. I worry I will forget chores, appointments, bills that must be paid. I worry my thoughts will scatter into more pieces than I can recollect. I am now in the business of recollecting myself. I have trouble breathing. My heart beats too fast, not all the time, in bursts. I have pains between my ribs, sometimes intense. My neck and head ache. My nerves buzz and hum, and electricity shoots up and down my limbs. My gut rumbles and my bowel rhythms are off. Some of these are old ailments that have worsened. I imagine I've grown a tumor that mirrors the one found in Paul's lung, and I will die soon. I take the fantasy further. Maybe mirror cancer is a rare medical phenomenon outside the purview of mainstream science, one of those outliers that has been jettisoned from cleaned data. I'm glad I can still laugh at myself. Then again, hypochondriacs die from illness too. I sleep by pill. I pick up a paper or an object that needs attention and then see another that calls to me. I put down the first thing only to spot it hours later, an inanimate victim of the unfinished gesture. A pile of unopened condolence letters and cards lie on the red table in the dining room. I cannot bear to open them. Not today. I will wait tomorrow. Tomorrow comes. I open the letters, but I don't always understand what I'm reading. The short, kind messages are best. There are also long, handwritten letters of many pages from people I don't know. Paul must have belonged to them in some way, but exactly how, I can't always make out. I sit down to write the word tomorrow for a to-do list. When I look down, I see that I have written yesterday. I think of Freud's comment about opposites in dreams. In the world of sleep, your towering friend may shrink to the size of a bug. There is a dreamlike quality to my life now. I climb into a half-filled bathtub and realize I have forgotten to remove my socks. Oh dear.
I'd like to begin with something you say about this book, that writing it was not a choice, but a necessity.
Yes.
Why?
Well, after Paul died, I understood very quickly that I wasn't going to be able to return, at least not right away, to the novel I had been working on for a couple of years and had about 200 pages. I know Paul thought that's what I would do. I really wanted to write, and the only thing I could write about was him, me, what we'd been through. I was compelled to do it. It felt like a compulsion. Mm-hmm. I also, not at the time, but upon hindsight, I've realized that grief is a passive phenomenon. It's as if it falls on you, the loss, the emptiness, the absence. Writing is active. And so there's a kind of agency against the flood of the grief. And I think that was helpful.
Mm-hmm. And doing that, you also question the language, because we have, and the grammar also, the thing about the we, us.
Yes. Well, and actually in this book, I have been, obviously I never lost my husband before now, but I had been writing about what Martin Buber, the Jewish theologian, calls the between, as a third reality. It's not either person, but what is created between them. And I think of this as a dynamic, changing area, and it's especially powerful in intimacy. So when I was writing this passage, I thought, that's it. It's the and. I don't, it's not, of course I miss Paul, but what I really miss is Paul and Siri, Siri and Paul. That thing that was between us and changed over the course of 43 years. And again, I've written about this, the relationality, between people, and also Merleau-Ponty's idea of intercorporeality that I mentioned in the book. But I thought, the and, that's just kind of, it's hard not to understand that.
Mm-hmm. Right? Merleau-Ponty was a kind of companion here at some point.
Yes. Well, I've been writing about him, and as I said, in some of my more scholarly work, this idea has been very important to me. But, also in psychoanalysis, that was mentioned earlier, the transference for Freud, right, that he referred to as an intermediate area. Mm-hmm. And in German, he called it a Tummelplatz, for those of you who know German. which was translated by Strachey as playground, but in German, playground summons children. And in German, it's not just children. A Tummelplatz is like a place of action. It could be the marketplace, it could be in a city, a Tummelplatz. But interestingly, another person I admire, D.W. Winnicott, the psychoanalyst,
Yes.
he couldn't read German, so he read Freud in the translation. And he talks about that area between as also as a potential space, and a potential space where play and culture are really important. So yes, I've thought a lot about that between, but never as simply as the and.
Yes, and you write about the end of Paul and Siri as a shared entity,
Yeah.
and what happens to and also you write about what happens to identity when the we disappears.
Yes.
And in that process, you find yourself with another identity also, in another word, widow.
Yes, the widow. Yes. So this thing got bigger than I thought. It's in the book. I was outside of the house and an acquaintance came by and she offered her condolences and I said, thank you. And then I said, yes, I'm a widow. And she goes, no. I go, yes, I'm a widow. That's what it's called. You know? And then actually an editor at Vogue in the UK said she was very interested in this and would I write something about it? And so I, of course, did some research and I, typed into Google, is widow a word like death? That nobody wants to say it anymore? And what came up was very interesting. It seems that the word widow is hovering between a neutral identification of a person's state and stigma. Mm-hmm. And then, I started reading about widow practices in southeastern Nigeria and in various places in the world. And indeed, widows are less appealing than widowers. And at the very end of that little essay for Vogue, I'm thinking, what is this? Well, I think, at least unconsciously, femininity is connected to the body and masculinity to the mind and the intellect. And that undergirds the feeling that the widow is somehow closer to the body and the corpse and death. Mm. And the other part of the widow problem is that the widow is out of patriarchal control.
Yeah. It's
a
liberation.
That's dangerous, that's a dangerous place in patriarchal cultures. So there's an avoidance. And if you go back, of course, to the witch trials, mm-hmm. a lot of widows were burned. But not in Norway. I don't know, I'm going on, but it's very interesting. So in Norway, during the 17th century, when there were several moral panics about witches, 91 people lost their lives, mostly women, and many of them were married. And I kept thinking, what's different about Norway? What is going on? And then I realized the men were fishing and the women were back on land, and they were out of control. And there were a number of husbands who were the accusers.
Mm-hmm. And that take me to now. You were a widow, and for 43 years, you were Paul Auster's wife. And
I was indeed.
Yes. So it's, how can a word alter an identity?
Well, I think, so either there's the sociological position, right? You're looking from the outside. And then there's the internal reality, what is lived, the lived experience. And I actually make a distinction between that third person identifications, Paul Auster's wife, and which I was often thought of as, and what was between us, right? So the inside of the marriage was fun. It really was. It was fun. And, the night Paul died, I wrote in my journal. And when he was dying, minutes away from dying, the hospice nurse, she said, he had morphine then, but she said, he can hear you. Talk to him. And what came to me was that. I said, oh, God, we had fun. And it seemed at that moment the most important thing to say. No one, if someone had told me that's what you're going to say, I would have said, no, I'll think of something much better than that. But that was it. And, a lot of play and a lot of humor and a lot of talk and a lot of touch. And it's hard for that to vanish overnight. And that intercorporeality business, which is one thing that Merleau-Ponty says, and I forgot about it when Paul was writing his last finished novel, Baumgartner, because he asked me, I think he was really interested in neurological explanations for phantom limb. But we had both forgotten that, of course, that is what Merleau-Ponty talks about as not just a metaphor, but he wonders if grief itself and the neurology of grief isn't related to phantom limb. Now, there are neuroscientists who dispute this, blah, 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 but I think that, the presence of the absence is, at the very least, a potent metaphor for grief itself.
And that takes us also to time and the way grief alters the sense of time. You wrote a lot about that.
Yes, I think it's a phenomenological shock, right? It's a subjective shock, even when you're prepared, and that interested me. I knew Paul was dying. He knew he was dying. We were prepared in that sense. I had imagined it, as I say in the second paragraph. But that's not what goes into shock. What goes into shock is this sort of pre-personal, moving self in the world that is so accustomed to having the other in your perceptual field that when that other vanishes, you lose time because you've lost timing, right? I like to say that time is an abstraction, an invisible abstraction that philosophers have written about and physicists talk about it. No one knows what it is. But timing is something we understand bodily. Heartbeat, the walk, breathing in and out, the human gait, but then also outside timing, right? Day and night, the seasons moving, all of that is part of our embodied experience of time. And when something is dramatically altered in a life, I think that you are knocked out of that timing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
When you decided to write this book, I guess one of the questions that you put yourself was, what should I include and exclude?
Exactly. What to put in and what to leave out.
Yes. How did you solve that I guess, difficult question?
It was funny because the book had it was an organism, and I was very interested in the rhythms. So as you mentioned, there are, letters I wrote to Paul in 1981. I hadn't looked at them since then. There are notes he wrote to me, and then the letters that he was writing to our grandson that was going to be part of the book, and those are in there. But I wanted the reader to get used to this motion, the rhythm. So some of my own prose, which sometimes contextualize Paul's letters, for example, or moved, stories would appear to me. Obviously, 43 years is a long time. I could have written thousands of pages and bored everyone stiff, but it was so sometimes stories would simply appear. But there is also a question, and I've been very open about this because I'm open in the book, that before Paul got sick and died, we went through what Paul called the horrible things, which was that our granddaughter, Ruby, the daughter of Daniel, Paul's son, my stepson, died at 10 months. And we didn't know why. And I, of course, true to my character, was reading a lot about sudden infant death syndrome. We just didn't know. But 6 months later, her father, Daniel, was arrested for negligent homicide because the medical report showed that Ruby died of fentanyl and heroin. And after he was released on bail, he went and got drugs and overdosed on the same thing and died. Well, that was really hard. I was absolutely unable to speak about that in public, only to the closest, most intimate people. But I realized if I was going to write about Paul and me, it would be impossible and fraudulent to, pretend he didn't have a son, pretend these things that were in, newspapers and media all over the world didn't happen. So this inclusion-exclusion thing, I knew it had to be in. And I had started writing the book when we had a memorial service for Paul in New York for about 200 people. And there were family, but also then people who we hadn't spoken directly to about the deaths. And I realized that I couldn't stand up there and address these, friends and colleagues without saying the horrible things aloud. I didn't want people to leave that memorial with this unspeakable thing because, people don't talk to you about it because it's so horrible. And so by saying it and writing it, I crossed a bridge. And then it became, because as I said at the memorial, it is part of our story, and it always will be. It will never leave. And it doesn't make it any better. It doesn't make it less gruesome. It doesn't make Daniel less guilty of negligence. None of that. But it makes it speakable. And so I knew I had to address it. And then there's a question, of course, that too is a big, long story that you could write hundreds of pages about. And I found a little comic that Daniel made when he was 12. And I knew it was there, but I hadn't read it for a long time. And when I reread it, I felt that this was a parable of his life, a parable about his need to hide the kind of inner self from everybody else. And it didn't matter how many rescue planes you sent in, he wanted to not answer that call, right? So and it's quoted in the book. So I was able to put some of this in his own voice, admittedly as a much younger person. But for me anyway, it lifted that story out of the tabloids and into a human context, a very sad and terrible one, but nevertheless a human context.
Yes, the question was how to tell it. I don't know.
How to tell it. And then, as I said, of course, everything, and I mean, I say it in the book, this is a book of telling and not telling. I'm not telling everything, but I also knew that this book, in the first person, as me, representing me, that it rested on intimacy and honesty. So everything I decided to tell, I told as frankly and honestly as I could from my perspective.
Mm-hmm. And that took us to the title, because we are talking about also
Yes.
ghosts and
Yes.
ghost stories. And ghosts here crosses all the working life of Paul Auster, because
Yes.
his books are full of ghosts, and he wants to. He told you that
He has
wants
a whole book called Ghosts in the New York Trilogy. It's the second volume. And yes, we were both interested in ghosts as metaphors. But when he was dying, we knew he was dying. And Paul said to me several times, I want to be a ghost. And he wanted to, come back, see what I was doing, see what our daughter Sophie was singing. She's a singer-songwriter. And he and I, too, fell in love with our son-in-law after Sophie did. And they became, Paul and Spencer became beloved friends. Yeah. So he wanted to see what photographs, he's a photographer, what photographs Spencer was taking. And then I had an experience of, it's called in the neurological literature, feeling of presence.
Yes.
And I had actually, I'd read a lot about this, and as a young girl, I think it was 10, 11, I had a feeling of presence, but a bad one, a malevolent feeling that there was something at the bottom of the stairs in my parents' house. Now, even then, I wasn't so old, but I knew there couldn't be anything there, really. But I felt it there. So I had to work up my courage, and I always counted to 10, and then I'd run down the stairs, and I'd jump over the last 5. Anyway, so that was my one other experience with a presence. But on the day of Paul's funeral, I left the small family gathering in our house. I went up to our bedroom, and I lay down on the bed and was just kind of in reverie. And I felt Paul on the stairs, felt him walk into the bedroom, pause by the bed. Now, this is the thing. I didn't see anything. I didn't hear anything. I didn't smell anything. There was no touch. I was absolutely sure where he was in the room. And I knew he was checking on me to see if I was okay. And then he turned and left. It was extraordinary. And by the way, so while he was looking at me, the invisible feeling of presence, I was flooded with joy. It was actually an ecstatic moment. And there is a part of this book where I work on explanations, including neuroscientific ones, but also phenomenological and philosophical, and kind of put them together. I think that what I was mentioning earlier, that this vacuum after a death of an intimate person who you live with is, the nervous system is really sensitive to deprivation. So if you think about the simplest thing is that when we're asleep, there's no stimuli, and we dream. You know, Freud said dreams protect sleep, which may indeed be real and good idea. And if you put someone in a sensory deprivation tank, after about 10, 15 minutes, they'll start hallucinating spontaneously. Almost everybody, not everybody, but almost everybody. And you know, there's another very simple thing. We have a blind spot, everybody knows this, in both eyes, and we should experience it, but we don't. I think the absence of grief produces from wish, like dreaming, it fills that empty space with a presence, sometimes with a full-blown hallucination. It's not complete. None of these explanations are complete. But
Yes. But you mentioned the smell,
Oh.
and the smell of cigarettes and
cigars.
cigars, I'm
And
sorry.
it's a special smell. These Schimmelpenninck cigars that Paul smoked for years and years and years, but he actually stopped 9 years before he died. And in June, after he died, I'm writing this book in my study, and I smell it. And I think there's someone in the backyard smoking. You know, or one of the backyards near us, because it's a row house in Brooklyn. I go to the window, no smoker. And then it started to come, sometimes 7, 8, 9 times a day. Very heavy in the beginning. And then it's tapered off now. But I had it in Madrid. It's a little sniff. There's no, vision of smoke, nothing like that. But I just smell it. It's quite common, too. And also, all this hallucination, olfactory hallucination, other ones, between 30 and 60% of bereaved people have some form of hallucinatory experience. So it's very common.
Yeah, and you mentioned also ghosts of a New York that doesn't exist anymore. It's
Yes.
very I don't know. I don't know. Maybe you can tell us also, how did you organize, because the book, it's not chronological.
No.
It's in spirals, or I don't know.
Yeah.
How did you organize your memories and your?
Well, I think, it was these documents that I had. So, at one point, it's not in the beginning of the book, I wrote 12 letters to close friends when Paul was ill, to keep them informed. So it's not that many letters, but when I reread them, I realized that I could never make a synopsis of the course of Paul's illness that was as refined as those letters. And and also the immediacy of the letters, because I'm writing as it's happening, puts the reader there. And then, all the way to the disappointment when there's a PS and I say, Paul is not accepting palliative chemo, and we're arranging for hospice. So I like that. That's earlier in the book. But then the book loops back to our first meeting in 1981 in February at the 92nd Street one. And some letters that I wrote to him when he left me briefly.
Very briefly.
And I got him back through the letters. And some of that material, as I said, I could never have reproduced those letters. I mean, their age, I was 26 years old. And so there was a certain adventure in uncovering documents.
How was that?
Too.
The first impact with that letters?
Well, I say it in the book, and I left them. The punctuation is egregious. It was like really, really embarrassing. And I just thought, okay, just leave it. That's how it was. I mean, I really didn't touch any of the the documents. So that was the first horror of the 26-year-old graduate student in English literature. But I think and this is honest, I do feel a certain tenderness for my former self. I do. And kind of, yeah, I had, as the Yiddish expression goes, chutzpah. And yeah, so there was a kind of pleasure in telling that story too.
But the Ghosts of New York, what about those?
Well, it's true that New York was a whole different place when we met. And it was scruffier, you know. 1 million people left New York City during the financial crisis, which had gotten a bit better by 1981, but it was not what it is now. But it was also a lot cheaper. So artists could live there,
And now it's not the same.
no.
This book also has I guess it's a conversation also about literature, because
Yes.
The writers that formed you, the writers that formed Paul, the way you talk with each other about those. I remember Dickens.
Yes.
And I remember Melville with Bartleby, that you made a kind of
Yes. Yes.
comparison between Auster and Bartleby.
Absolutely. So books were really, really important, and we shared a lot of books, especially when we first met. Actually, over time, we diverged more because I read more science that Paul never read. But I talked to him so much about my reading that, especially about brain science, that at one point, you know, I would use him to read, if I was writing for a general, not a scholarly audience, to say, do you understand this? Because he was an intelligent reader, but not really informed. But over the years, just from listening to me give papers to him, he got pretty good at, you know, he could see the cerebellum and the hippocampus and the prefrontal cortex and stuff. All that was really familiar to him. And I said, now you're useless. And I learned things from him, too, about, he read a lot of history. And I always meant to read some of the histories that he read. But he talked about them with such precision that I almost felt as if I'd read them. So there was a lot of sharing like that. But also we were each other's editors, so we read aloud to each other. And I mentioned this in the book. Over the years, it happened twice that Paul was reading to me, and I said, that sentence is straight out of The Sorrows of an American, one of my novels. And I did it to Paul, too. I can't remember, it's in the book, but I just lifted a whole sentence. We changed them. But I think this is very interesting because that was clearly unconscious plagiarism. And I asked the question, to what degree did we influence each other? Mm-hmm. I think we certainly did. But by the time the influence was working in a book, say, it had become unconscious.
Mm-hmm. And this is, you mentioned that also, this is the first book that you wrote that wasn't read by Paul.
Yes. And actually, you know, I have to say,
you feel insecure with that?
His entire prose career was also edited by me, you guys.
Yes.
So, but he didn't have to live on without me. I'm the one. And I do mention that in some ways, of course, some of his criticisms I have internalized. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So they become part of your working effort. But yeah, listen, I missed him. I missed him.
You still. One of the most touching, I guess, parts of the book are the parts that you describe your daily life, daily routines, and then you have nobody to share with that, because you describe things about
all kinds of things, watching movies and dinner and, you know, all of that. If you think about, for those of you living in a domestic relation, how central, how fundamental they are to your life. And it's one of the reasons I talk about keeping up the forms as a way to both continue rituals that eventually then, I think over the 2 years since he's been dead, the habit body, this, gets more used to those rituals alone. The shock starts to diminish. But I just want to say one thing about Bartleby, because Paul was really stubborn. It's not a hagiography. This is not St. Paul. Life was St. Paul. He had his his difficult sides, as did I. And so the funny thing about Bartleby, as I think the Melville story, I would prefer not to. Paul often preferred not to. And he could be quite immovable. And at the same time, as is the case with many of us, his stubbornness was also a great force in his work. He was able to work without distraction. He had a kind of tunnel vision from one book to the next. And I admired that too. And in my case, it was sensitivity. My sisters called me the princess on the book. And that's in the book too. And so sensitivity, it can be annoying and, a little fluttery. But in my case too, sensitivity is also something that has been very good for my work. And it's partly neurological. I'm a migrainer, et cetera, et cetera. But at one point, I was very proud of this sentence. I said, Bartleby and the princess on the pea got married. and yes, so, well, these kind of jokes, but it's also real. It was also real.
And comedy was very, very part of your life. It's
absolutely. We felt privately, I don't think people necessarily saw us like that, as a kind of comedy team in the house. Lots of laughing, lots of jokes, and that was
a lamp for 2 for 1.
Yes. So,
the letters to Miles, Paul's letters to Miles. You decided to include those letters here.
Yes.
The intention, Paul's intention was to make a book.
Yes.
With those letters, but
many more. I mean, so 35 pages he finished, and he says in one of the letters, well, the last letter, that he had thought of writing a book of between 100 and 200 pages. And of course, he couldn't do that. And I realized that to publish those 35 pages, it really feels like an aborted book. But if I put them into my book, it would both represent the dialogue that was our marriage and point forward to the next generation, to Miles, that Paul clearly wanted to do. And so that gave me satisfaction. Also, the reader gets to feel the difference in the two proses.
Yes.
And moving, again, this is part of the rhythm of the book, between my prose and Paul's prose.
Yes.
And that actually gave me a lot of satisfaction typing up the letters as part of the book, because I'm entering his rhythms and his music and his late style.
You never have a computer.
No. And I talk about that too. Paul stopped his technological advancement with the fax. And he didn't like computers, and he never had a cell phone, which could be irritating too, part of his stubbornness. So, no. No.
So you have a sentence that stayed with me. You write, in my case, grief does not make pleasure impossible.
No. And even, that was just when I started writing that first part of the book, it was very close to his death. And I say when I'm, having my mirror cancer fantasy, which I realize is ridiculous, that I didn't lose my sense of humor.
Never.
No, never. And here's another thing. Ghosts, all text is ghostly, right? It's disembodied. It's a representation. And I find what I think of as a cooling distance in the act of representation itself. But in humor, also, to have humor about yourself, you have to remove yourself and look at yourself as an object. It's part of reflective self-consciousness. And in grief, which is a very hot experience, a very emotionally burning experience, I found relief in writing, I found relief in reading, and I found relief in humor. And unlike some people who I've actually talked to who have read the book, I did not feel guilt about my moments of happiness at all. And no, not at all. And some people do, I know.
Yes.
Yeah.
Many people. After writing this book, Ghost Stories, what remains beyond words for you?
What remains beyond words? You mean of our story? You
Yes.
mean me and Paul? Well, this is the thing. Of course, I think I'll grieve that man until I die. And, every day, I miss him intensely. But there's the other part, which is there's a little chapter that's called Becoming Paul. And I picked up some of his habits. They're not all the good ones either. And there's, in the bereavement literature, there is some discussion of the surviving spouse incorporating parts of the dead person. And I know that I've done that. Paul was very anxious, about his keys and his, he had a little book of telephone numbers and everything that he carried. I ordered it every year. It was about this big. And really anxious. He always knew where they were, and he always had a pen in his pocket. And I didn't. Sometimes my keys, I could lose my keys. No. Now, I always know. I always carry a pen, just the way Paul did. I turn off lights in the house. He was so annoyed that I didn't turn off the lights. And stuff like that. So there's a way we take people with us. And some of those habits are comforting to me. I'm carrying these little Paul habits around now. And so we find ways. It doesn't make it better, it's worse. But that's life. People die. We lose them. We grieve. It's ordinary. It's not easy, but it's ordinary. And again, that helps. You contextualize yourself in a bigger place. That's why reading all that bereavement stuff and grief memoirs. But the one thing I could say about this is most grief memoirs, the dead person isn't there. It's an anatomy of the griever. Not the dead person. Absolutely absent. In almost all the ones I read. There may be exceptions, but I did not want that. I wanted him to come back on the page to the degree that that was possible, including in his own voice. So it makes it a little different.
Okay, I guess it's time to open to
Yes,
the
okay.
audience. Now it's up to you. Questions to Siri. There's no questions?
Oh, yes. Good. How do we do this? Is there a
Is there a
plan?
microphone?
I don't know.
Over there.
No, I don't. Oh, no.
They have one.
Oh, they have one. Or, and it's noisy.
Yeah.
Oh. I think they're over here. Oh, yeah. There was the man here in the third row. Yeah.
I have a mic. Thank you for coming. You don't have to talk about yourself in this, but the question that comes to mind is so many of my friends who've known people who've lost spouses and partners think there's strong male-female differences, as though in general, that man's going to have to find another woman. He surely will, can't do it on his own. But women can probably do the rest of their lives. Any observations?
Yeah, it's very interesting. My mother became a widow older than I was. My father died at 81. They were just about the same age. She was a year younger at 80. And after, well, actually a little before my father died, she moved into an apartment, independent living apartment in a complex where you had, if you wanted help, et cetera, et cetera. And there were a lot of widows there. And actually that was good for my mother. She made lots of friends. And those widows did not want to get married again at all. And they did not want to take care of anyone anymore. But the men, the widowers who were in the complex, they would find girlfriends or marry again. So there was that. You're absolutely right. This is a trend. And I think it's a trend because of sex role differences, especially, that women just still do a lot more of the caring work than men. And so when men lose the carer, they look for a replacement. And and women can just take care of themselves then.
Siri, thank you for being here. Your grief is very real and very palpable, so I am with you on this. So my question is, let's turn this moment into a liberating moment. Tell us something one of those fun moments that really changed the course of your life with Paul.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess you have to read the book. I mean, the book is full of sort of, little details. But, well, this is not maybe quite what you're asking, but, Paul said over and over, and early in our relationship, what would have happened if I hadn't met you? And this is a very Austerian idea, right? I would say, well, the poetry world in New York, it's not that small. We probably would have met each other, blah, blah, blah. But it would have been different. And he felt, and over the years, he said it many times, and over the years, I began to understand how he did not believe in fate. He believed in accident. But he also believed that accidents create and form lives, that they're very important. And I think living with him for all those years, I came to understand the weight that he placed on that chance meeting at the 92nd Street Y. And also on for the first, 6 hours, I don't think he was that interested in me. I talked it into him. So my perseverance, and then he left, and I wrote these letters to get him back, and he came back, and then we were together until he died. But I think he felt that chance meeting was hugely important. And when he said to me early on, City of Glass is about what would have happened to me if I hadn't met you. And he said it to journalists too. It's out there, and I thought, how weird. But then I understood more that his solitary reality, especially when I met him, became less solitary over the years, less hidden.
Hi. First of all, as a transplanted Brooklynite, I really appreciate your presence from Carroll Gardens to Lapa.
There we go.
Anyway, I was curious about whether your relationship between certain objects that Paul had owned during his life changed when he died. I say that because when I had to clear out my mom's
Yeah.
house, I could throw away all kinds of things, but I brought her comb with me to Portugal, and I still have her comb 10 years later.
Well, no, there are things that Paul had a leather jacket that he loved. He bought it in Argentina years ago, but it was a good one. You know, it held up. And after he died, it was the spring. And, you know, I went and saw the jacket, went into the closet, and I put my nose in it to see if it smelled like him. It actually didn't. Probably been hanging there, you know, during the warm months. But there were things that I saved, and I'm so glad that I did, because I had a purging moment, you know, of getting rid of stuff. You know, I'm not going to be one of those widows who has his clothes hanging in the closet for 2 years or something. But I did save some clothes that I wear and feel, you know, happy in, sweaters, and he had these, you know, kind of sweatpants. I mean, they're really huge, but they're very comfortable to work in, and I just pull that string. So yes, the objects, and they're not haunted for me in that negative way. I feel them as a form of happiness and closeness. Yeah. There's.
Hi. I want to ask about your view on Paul's writing and how you would say that it changed over the years, especially his prose, and also what about his writing did you envy, and what about his writing did you want to change as an editor?
Well, let's start with the first thing. I think there really is an arc in Paul's work, and you know, in the very early books, well, it's men alone in rooms, and I think that was very much part of the imagination, and actually in Moon Palace with Fogg, who's starving himself in Central Park, but he's saved by his friends. And I think over the course of the books, you begin to see this opening to more communal work. And if you look at the sentences, especially, I mean, if you read City of Glass and you read 4321, you will notice a significant change in both the rhythm of the sentences and a kind of opening and elongation and a much more of a demotic, you know, conversational tone. And that this you see in the letters to Miles and in some of those late books, 4321, I think it's really in its full bloom. And also this openness to the outside. If you look at books like Brooklyn Follies and Sunset Park, and you know, I noticed that. And some great female characters that come in the later work too. Although in Moon Palace, so there's a kind of expansion in Paul that I felt as his partner, and as far as did you say? What did I envy and what do I? Yeah. Oh, you know, there are many things. I mean, Paul and I spent a lot of time talking about the music of sentences, and enjoying the music of the other's sentence. And in this book, I cite some of them, some of Paul's that made me tingle. And, but you know, whatever I objected to, I told him at the time, and he changed it. And he did the same for me. I mean, it's absolutely true. We never didn't take the other person's advice. Neither of us could remember a time. So that's interesting. And mostly it was on the level of the sentence, things like, you used that word before, you know, you don't need that clause, you're on a tangent, things like that. But sometimes they were substantive, and I mentioned that. He wrote 2 endings of Oracle Night that I did not like. And then he wrote a 3rd, and I thought it was perfect. And I wrote my 3rd draft of a novel, What I Loved, my 3rd novel. And Paul read it, and he said, "It's not there yet." That was after 5 years. And he was right. I knew he was right. I rewrote the whole novel from scratch in 9 months, and he loved it. So that gives you an idea of the relationship. I don't think anything got out of our house that both of us didn't like. And then there's Baumgartner. Such an odd novel. You know what Paul said to me the whole time he was writing his last novel? And he had to read to me all the time. It was almost a plague. He kept saying, I can't go on, I have to read to you. I'd say, okay, what time? You know, he'd say, okay, 4 o'clock, how many pages? I'd say, anyway, the reason he kept saying, I have no idea what I'm doing. None. And I would listen to it, and I would say, it's great. I had so few comments about that. And it was written in an unconscious motion. And after I read the whole manuscript, I said to myself, only a master could have written this book because the structure is so damn complicated and the reader doesn't notice. Just like this guy. Really complicated, but you're just swimming. And that's age. That's when you've been doing it a long time. And something happens. Because as he said, he didn't know what he was doing. And I have to say too, I knew what I was doing and I didn't know what I was doing, but I felt it. I felt this is the right beat. This is the right rhythm. And that's how Baumgartner works. It's, for me, I find it an amazing book. And, you know, he wrote it and then died. And I am Baumgartner. He knew he was sick and knew he could die. And sometimes I think he was anticipating my grief. And maybe not. I don't know. I know. I know you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Over the years, I've had the great privilege of hearing Paul read and speak here in Lisbon. I've seen Sophie perform in Lisbon.
There you go.
And now you're here. I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit about your family's relationship to Portugal and what
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
We love Portugal. No, I know that's ridiculous. That's silly to say. No, but you know, Paul made a movie here.
Yeah.
And The Inner Life of Martin Frost.
Yes.
And Sophie was in it. And at one point in the movie making, I came, and my mother came. My mother died in 2019, but it really was a family time. Of course, Paul was on the set directing, and Sophie was in the film, but I first, but then when my mother came to visit, we would walk, we stayed in Sintra, in Lord Byron's grandmother's house. That's now a hotel. Lawrence's. And then we would join them for dinner. And it was a kind of, Sintra is an enchanted place with plants you've never seen. And my mother and I walked everywhere. So that Portuguese enchantment. And then they were near Cascais. And we would have dinner over the water.
Yes.
And, fresh fish and the vegetables. And it was paradise. And that was my mother. She was in her 80s. It wasn't so long after my father died. And we had ordered food, but we hadn't gotten it yet. And Mama's looking down at the water. She grew up in Norway near the ocean. And she goes, "I'm going in." It was cold. I'm not. And Irene Jacob, who was in the movie, a French actress, Mama goes running down the stairs out to the beach. It's getting darker, and Irene follows her. And I watch as these two figures, my mother's rolling up her pants, and Irene, they're, wading and making noises. And they come back really wet. And my mother sat down beside me, and she looked at me, and she said, "I could die here." And it wasn't what I expected. And then she said, "Oh, but then you and Paul would have to ship the body back to you." That would be such a bother. So I guess not. That was very much my mother in a nutshell. Spontaneous, enjoying herself enormously, and then thinking about the people she loved, and she didn't want them to be inconvenienced by her body. So it's deeply part of the family, this place. Hi.
Siri, now that you wrote this book,
Yes.
Did it reveal anything to you?
Well, yes. I think some of the documents, as I said, were really interesting. And I actually went back and looked at my dissertation and looked at City of Glass and the trilogy that I was writing my dissertation and he was writing the trilogy, and the overlaps between those two works about language, identity, and authority. I mean, mine is more focused on, I talk about patriarchal authority specifically in a way probably that the trilogy doesn't, but it's fathers and sons. And I was amazed at how close. And, I had started thinking about this material before I met Paul, and so had Paul. He had written earlier drafts, well, not quite drafts, but of a big novel that he took from when he was writing the trilogy and later Moon Palace. So we were both inside this kind of thinking before we knew each other. Then we both talked about what we were working on, but it never occurred to me at the time how entwined these thoughts were. Of course, a dissertation is not 3 novels that became very famous once he published them. My dissertation was never published. But inside is what I'm talking about. This surprised me. And part of it was because I hadn't reread my dissertation. You do it, you get it. And I hadn't looked at City of Glass or the trilogy for quite a while. And it popped out at me. So that was a revelation about our early life together and how in tune we were with each other, I think from before, but then maybe also how cross references became part of those two works. strange. That was strange.
No more questions? One more?
Hello, Siri.
Hi.
It's wonderful to have you here with us. I met Paul because I'm a journalist and I talked with him about his books and his work. And when he published here in Portugal 4321,
Yes.
the novel, I had a conversation with him and I told him, well, I think this book is only a great poet could write a book like this. And we talked a little bit about poetry, but he didn't tell me why he stopped publishing poetry. Do you know why?
Yes, in a way I do, because Paul always wanted to write novels. And when I mentioned the novel that he was writing in college, and I mentioned it in the book, which he later took material from, it was so, I think, ambitious that his ambition outstripped his ability at that time. And then he started writing poems. And in a way, it's a more confined and manageable and shrunken form. And when his father died, this is interesting to me about death unleashing certain texts. That's when he wrote The Invention of Solitude, prose work, and it unleashed his prose, I think. And then after The Invention of Solitude, he started the trilogy. But that was an ambition that he had had from as a very young man. So
But
that's
he
why.
was a wonderful poet.
He was a terrific poet, and I also say in the book that if I hadn't liked those poems, we never would have been together.
So it was poetry also. That's great. Thank you.
Sure.
Hi.
Hi.
There's a novel that is very special for me, which is Mr. Vertigo. So I would like to know your opinion about it. What you think about it.
Well, I think it's a really good novel, too. I could tell, more anecdotally, is that, magicians love that book. Magicians love that book. Ricky Jay, he died, but he became a very good friend. He was the best sleight of hand artist in the world. Performed mostly in small theaters so people could see the close-up. He loved Mr. Vertigo, and that's how we got to know. And a much splashier guy, David Copperfield, he does big things, and we didn't really know him, but he wanted Paul to write a text for his show. And Paul wasn't able to do that. And then another magician, David Blaine, who did become not a close friend, but a friend. He performed for Paul's 70th birthday in Miami, and loved Mr. Vertigo. So take that, put that in your pipe and smoke it. I think anecdotes are maybe better than, yes, I could give you a long-winded literary analysis, but I'm not going to do that.
Thank you so much, Siri. Thank you.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Siri,
Thanks.
she will sign your books.
I will sign
over
books.
there.
Out there? Okay.
Yes.
We could